year, in a field in Cornwall, they gather to commemorate the last battle of the greatest of all British heroes. The tales of Arthur have got it all. Love and courage, betrayal, and the ultimate spiritual quest. This is a search for the legend of King Arthur, a journey through Celtic Britain, France and Ireland. It's a story of ancient alchemy and medieval mysticism. A tale of a lost golden age which one day will return. And more than that, Arthur's story, so the Celtic bard said, was the matter of Britain. The legend of King Arthur has been told by poets and filmmakers for 1,000 years. How the pure knighthood was destroyed in the end by adulterous love and the horror of civil war. Merlin! Where are you? It has immortal characters and imperishable symbols, the Holy Grail, the Round Table, and the magic sword, Excalibur. Our search for the legend of King Arthur begins not in the Isle of Avalon or in Camelot, but here among the canal barges in an industrial suburb of Oxford. It's rare that you can pinpoint the exact time and place in which a myth gets created or reshaped by a great storyteller. But in this case we can. This, believe it or not, is the most important place in the creation of the myths of King Arthur. Just come and have a look at this. Isn't that brilliant? This is all that's left of the 12th century abbey on Osney Island outside Oxford. It was here in 1129 that a young Welsh cleric became the most influential, the most brilliant and the most imaginative creator of the Arthur myth. His name, Geoffrey of Monmouth. It was right on this spot that Geoffrey created an imaginary history of the Celts, as the Celts might have dreamed their history could be. Here for the first time are Merlin and Guinevere, and the wicked Mordred, the betrayer of Arthur. Here's the prototypes of Excalibur and Camelot and Avalon, and at the centre of it, Arthur himself, the once and future king. But when you think of Geoffrey's Arthur, don't think history, think storytelling. This is a kind of dazzling medieval infotainment, in comparison with which mere historical fact is simply boring.
Now Uther Pendragon was Lord of Britain. He held a great feast, and among those present was Gorlois, Duke of Cornwall, with his wife, Igerna, the greatest beauty in all Britain. When the king cast his eyes on her, he fell madly in love. Her husband, discovering this, retired angrily from the court. He put his wife into the castle of Tintagel by the sea-shore, a place of the greatest safety. Then King Uther said to the wizard Merlin, "My passion for Igerna is such that if I do not possess her, I will go mad with desire." And Merlin said, "I have a magic potion that will make you appear the exact likeness of her husband, and you can go to her." The king drank the potion, and he went to Tintagel, and he was let in. And the king stayed all night in Igerna's arms, and he made passionate love to her, for she was deceived by Merlin's magic. And that was the night Arthur was conceived.
Great myths need great locations, and the Dark Age fortress at Tintagel in Cornwall simply begs to be included. Here Geoffrey heard folk tales about a Celtic hero, Arthur, who would one day return.
We know that Geoffrey was writing in the 1130s, picking up various stories around the country, and that he was somehow induced to visit Tintagel. And his description, when we get on to the question of Arthur's conception by trickery, makes it perfectly clear that he was here. All we're told is Arthur's conceived here. The assumption is he's born here. After that, one has to say, in the history of the kings of Britain, Arthur doesn't have anything more to do with Tintagel, but that was sufficient to spark it off. Somehow a whole series of beliefs is brought together by this genius, this romancer, this Geoffrey Archer of our period. It's a wonderful book, the historian, and it's brought here.
Thank you very much.
But Geoffrey's Arthur wasn't just a good story, it was a political weapon. His prophecy that Britain would rise again could be used against the English oppressors. The Celts needed a hero, and Geoffrey provided him.
King Arthur represents the Celtic spirit for bards and people of Cornwall. And therefore when we all cry Nindu Maro Michter Arthur, essentially it's expressing the fact that the Celtic spirit is not dead in this country.
Every year the Celtic bards meet here in Bodmin, speaking the ancient British language of Cornwall.
Otama Clether, is in lay Caliscoch. Clether Michter Arthur.
Swearing on Arthur's Excalibur, their independence from the English.
Nindu Maro, Michter Arthur. King Arthur's not dead, at least not in spirit anyway. And the sword represents the spirit of Arthur, who defended Britain as we diminished westward in the onslaught of the Anglo-Saxons many thousand years ago.
But the idea of Arthur as a resistance hero against the English was far older than Geoffrey. In the Roman Empire, Britain was the jewel in the crown. When the Romans left, it was coveted by the barbarians, especially the Saxons, ancestors of today's English, who sailed across the sea from Germany. According to later legend, the Saxon invaders were first welcomed by the British ruler, the tyrant Lord Vortigern.
The Anglo-Saxon tradition was that the first landing of the Anglo-Saxons was at a place called Ipwinasfleot, which most people say is Ebbsfleet. Where's Ebbsfleet?
Well, Ebbsfleet is just behind the power station to our starboard side.
It all looks like some nondescript backwater of 21st century Britain, doesn't it? But this is the scene of perhaps the most momentous events that ever took place in the history of the British Isles. We're in one of the marshy channels between the Isle of Thanet and the mainland of Kent. And according to legend, it was here in the year 449 AD that 3 ships came sailing up under the command of 2 pagan Saxon chieftains. Their names were Hengist and Horsa, a stallion and a horse.
Hengist and Horsa, so the legend goes, were hired as mercenaries by Lord Vortigern to fight for him. Unwisely, perhaps, Vortigern gave them land as a reward, but the Saxons soon turned against him and took more for themselves. A foothold in Britain that would become England. In the heart of rural Kent, this reenactment crew are recreating that ancient English past. They're building a Saxon long haul. For Kim Sidorn, it really is a dream come true.
Isn't that amazing? So it's like the great medieval barns in a way.
It
It's
is
the same idea, I suppose, is it?
And the woodwork is very similar.
The hall will be accurate in every historical detail, but it will also embody an English myth.
Where's the fire?
You're standing in it, basically. There'll be a long fire running up the centre of the building, perhaps 12 feet long or so.
And for many English people, that myth arouses emotions as strong as those felt by the Celtic bards in Cornwall. But then, the English were the winners.
Athelstan, König, Eorl the Grichten, Birna Bjargifa, and his brother Edmund Athel. On this island.
This poem was written over 1,000 years ago in Old English.
Sveordus Ejum, Sithen Engle on Saxon.
It boasts of the coming of the Saxons and their conquest of the Britons.
Britannia Sochtan, Ert begetten. Angles and the Saxons, you can almost hear it in modern English, can't you? Since the Angles and Saxons came over across the broad waves, Offer Bradbrimu, sought out Britain, Britannia Sochtan, and took the earth, Ert begetten. Amazing, amazing, isn't it?
England. England is an idea that has lit the world for 1,000 years.
The land holds the bones of those who died for it. England is still an idea and an ideal, and is held high in the hearts of many of us. And I speak for ordinary people as well as nuts like us that seek to recreate this period.
And it was in response to such tales of Saxon victories that the Celts created their own hero.
Arthur, the Lord of Battles, fought for the kings of Britain against the Saxon invaders. He fought 12 battles, and he carried the image of the Virgin Mary on his shoulders and our Lord Jesus Christ in his heart. In his 12th battle on Mount Badon, 960 Saxons fell in one day from one charge, and no one struck them down but Arthur alone. And in all his wars, he was the victor.
By the time that tale was written in the 9th century, the Celts, or the Welsh as the English call them, had been pushed to the corners of the island, still railing against the man who had betrayed Britain.
Vortigern, having fled from the Saxons that he'd invited into the country to help him with his battles, was advised to build a castle in one of the strongest places in the island of Britain. And he came here, but unfortunately, every time his workmen returned to their labours, they found that the stones were scattered all over the place and they weren't able to build the castle. His advisors, his counsellors, told him that there was a curse that made it impossible to build anything, and the only way that you could break that curse was to find a golden-haired boy whose mother could confirm that there never was any father, and to kill the boy and sprinkle his blood around the summit of the hill.
The boy led Vortigern to the top of the hill here at Dinas Emrys. Under a stone pavement, he revealed a great jar. Inside were 2 dragons, one white and one red. The dragons fought each other until the red one triumphed and the white one fled. It was a prophecy, the boy said. One day the Celts would overthrow the Saxons, a hero would appear, and Britain would rise again.
And this is supposedly the exact spot where it happened. When the archaeologist that was working here in the 1950s dug, indeed he did find a pavement exactly where you'd expect to find it.
I don't suppose it's possible this really was the fortress of Vortigern, is it?
Well, that's another suggestion. Maybe there was a fortress here. Maybe there are dragons still here.
Spared from death, it was the blonde boy who prophesied the return of Arthur. And the boy's name? Merlin, or as we know him, Merlin. But to the Welsh, Merlin is also one of their first bards, and today's Welsh poets still claim his inspiration.
The image of Merlin we have today is a bit like kind of Gandalf in Lord of the Rings, isn't it? But who is the first Merlin?
He was a court poet in the north of England when the whole of Britain was British Welsh. He becomes a kind of a seer, but not a wizard. He doesn't go change people's frogs and stuff, but he does have this power to see things that other people can't.
Yeah, he's more of a prophet than somebody who pulls rabbits out of a hat.
Yeah, that's right. And the oldest poetry that survived talks about him in the wood with his piglet. He speaks to his piglet, like a familiar in a way. And they're long pieces of verse, half of which are factual and historic, and half of which are just ranting about different things.
And these verses survive?
Yeah.
Can you do them?
We can do some now.
Yes.
Can we refer to our book? Can we Myrddin o dwi fi, brenin proffwydi, y man gweiddi mwyn a gwyddau. He says, I am Merlin, the king of prophets, and I loudly proclaim, and since I am Merlin, prophetic words pour from my mouth like the best wine.
Gwn ddyfnder pob llyn, rhif plu a deryn, pam na fydd sgodyn yn rhoi esgidiau, which is, I know the depth of every lake, the number of a bird's feathers, why fish go unshod.
Gwn uchder seran, lled y ffurfafan, pam y bydd pen yn llawn plaenau.
What does that mean?
It means I know how high a star is, and I know how wide heaven is, and I know why mine's trouble.
So it was through poetry and prophecy that Arthur first came into being. But it was Merlin's magic that made him not just a warrior, but a king.
On Christmas Eve, when the nobles of England came out of church, they saw a great stone with an iron anvil into which a sword was fixed. And on the sword blade, inlaid in gilt, it said, "Whoever takes this sword out of the stone shall be king." And all the worthiest lords tried, and no one could move it. Then young Arthur happened to ride up on his horse, and he saw the stone, and he leaned over in his saddle, took the sword by the hilt, and drew it out. And the Archbishop said, "Here is the man that God has chosen, as you have all seen." And that was the way Arthur became king.
And that story shows how Arthur begins to attract other tales, like a magnet.
Hi, Neil.
Hi, Martha.
Hi. Oh, so this is it.
Yeah, this is a simple charcoal furnace we're using today. Take a seat.
Thank you.
That's it. You just go left and right.
That's great.
The sword in the stone is one of the most famous of the tales of Arthur.
You can go a little bit slower.
But this part of the legend may come from much more ancient times.
Back in the Bronze Age, this was an absolutely magical thing, as well as a dramatic technological innovation. The smith is somebody who transforms base metals into something beautiful and extraordinary.
Neil Burridge is a bronze caster, and he's worked out the ancient technique of casting bronze swords in a stone mould.
We get rid of some of this charcoal on this top. Can you see?
Yeah. Oh, wow, look at it inside.
We go this way.
Okay.
And
we pour?
And we pour. There we go. Right, you can talk.
Yeah, is that it?
That's it. We can tell it's set now. Because it's not moving. So if we use this, push the middle, we can tell it's set. So now we're going to lay it down. And then try and entice the mould apart. So we've got a nice casting.
See? Look at that, that's absolutely amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is magic. So there's the sword in the stone.
It's amazing how quickly you've got a weapon, isn't it?
It's almost instant. That's a technique from the Middle Bronze Age, about 1000 BC, but you can see how a process like that was the kind of thing that could be remembered by the bards and the poets and handed down. Maybe the story of the sword in the stone is a hangover of that ancient past.
By the late 12th century, Arthur had become a rallying cry for Welsh revolt, and the English began to see him as a threat. According to Geoffrey of Monmouth, Arthur's last resting place was the Isle of Avalon, Glastonbury.
Lady Chapel starts at that arch there, does it? Is that right?
And here the English king Henry II decided to prove that Arthur was dead and could never come back.
And how many paces?
About 14, 15 paces.
14 or 15 paces?
14.
Clues in medieval chronicles allow us to piece together what really happened on Britain's first archaeological dig.
11, 12, 15.
Round about here is the tomb, yeah.
When they started digging, they put up a pavilion around the spot so that people couldn't see what they were doing.
They screened it off like a kind of police investigation.
Just like a police investigation.
And Gerald of Wales said that they went down 16 feet.
Yeah. And what did Gerald say they found at the bottom of the hole then?
A large hollowed oak coffin with two skeletons, one of Arthur, one of Guinevere.
This is the page from Camden's Britannia, and this is his drawing of the cross. Hic jacet inclitus rex Arturius in insula Avalonia. Is that suspicious?
I think it's very suspicious. I think it's suspicious partly because we talk about the famous King Arthur. Yeah. King Arthur doesn't become famous until long after his death.
And the lettering's wrong as well. The lettering's 12th century.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
I heard too
so they've given themselves away.
So there you are. The 1191 excavation of King Arthur's body here at Glastonbury, without a shadow of doubt, was a fraud. But it sparked off an explosion of interest in the legend. Given a fine new tomb in Glastonbury, Arthur became a huge tourist draw. Meanwhile, his legend went international. Henry II's French wife, Eleanor of Aquitaine, hired French poets to write new Arthur myths. Their Arthur was a courtly hero of the age of chivalry. The former Welsh guerrilla was now head of the most glamorous court in Europe. And what better place to imagine it? Towering ramparts, fairy tale turrets, monks and nuns, knightly halls. This is how the medieval romances picture the world of King Arthur. The Britons are also Celts, cousins of the Cornish and the Welsh. Bertrand Vinton does tours of the Breton Arthurian sites. We're heading to little island over there, Tommelin. It's about how far is it? About a kilometre? Or?
No, it's about 3 kilometers from here. Like it's really tricky. You think it's so near, it's kind of distance.
Here in France, Arthur became a kind of medieval Superman who slew monsters, rescued maidens, and fought giants.
So the stories of Arthur, Arthur, and Merlin, they are well known here in France and Brittany. Amazing. Now there is a British legend that is about Tommelin. Arthur came here and and killed the giant.
Yes.
Is this story also here?
Yes, that was an ogre who came from like Spain, this one.
An ogre who came from Spain?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
He was
fantastic.
huge, and he used to live in this island of the Mont Saint-Michel.
Yeah.
Arthur was on his way to Rome. He heard that he was a princess who was like in trouble with that ogre. So he decided to come to the rescue.
Arthur killed the ogre, but he was too late. Princess Helene was already dead. Breton legend says he buried her here on the island.
Here we are, all the way to the top. Let's see the Mont Saint-Michel.
And so Brittany became another Arthur country. And what a human thing it is in places of such breathtaking beauty to create wonderful stories and tie them to real landscapes. That's how myths grow, crystallizing our dreams. And it was here in France that medieval dreamers now made the tale of Arthur and his knights a focus for the spiritual values of the age.
But of all the writers who reimagined Arthur in the 12th century, the greatest was Chrétien de Troyes. Chrétien took the legend onto a whole new level of romance and chivalry and spiritual quest. And in his last work he added an amazing twist, a wonderful theme which has captivated the world ever since.
A young knight, Sir Percival, arrives tired and hungry at a magical castle. From here to Beirut, says Chrétien, a more beautiful castle could never be seen. But a dark threat of war and suffering hangs over the land. Percival is led into the hall, and there is seated, as if for a feast. And he watches in silence as a vision unfolds.
A boy came in, holding a white lance, and he passed in front of the fire. Everyone in the hall saw a drop of blood issue from the tip of the lance, and the red drop ran right down to the boy's hand. Now a girl came in, fair and comely, and between her hands she held a grail. And when she carried the grail in, the hall was filled with a light so brilliant that the candles lost their brightness, as do the moon or stars when the sun rises. And Percival went to sleep, longing to know the meaning of this vision, and who is to be served from the Grail.
When Percival woke, the castle was empty and the Grail was gone. And a quest began that has fascinated writers and filmmakers ever since. A Grail is a serving dish, but it soon became the Grail, the cup used by Christ at the Last Supper.
That's a sweet place, isn't it?
The tale invented by Chrétien came back to England and soon spread to the Welsh borders.
This is it.
Not yet. And here they say if you want to find the Holy Grail, the key, or rather the keys, are kept in the Hodnett village shop.
Hi, Jonas. Nice to meet you. Sorry to disturb you. Can we borrow the key for the church?
Yes, you certainly can. Over here. Now, it's a bit complicated. That's the outer door.
Okay.
You go into the little door in the corner.
Okay.
So that's the outer door upper lock.
Okay.
That's the inner door upper lock and the inner door bottom lock.
Thanks very much.
The Grail story appears in a 13th century Shropshire legend, and it resurfaces with a Victorian antiquarian, Thomas Wright.
Was he left a series of clues within the foliage? Finally, brought you to this church.
Graham Phillips has spent years trying to untangle the riddle. He thinks that Wright left clues to the whereabouts of the Holy Grail in the west window of the village church.
Oh, there it is. You can see that the four figures represented are supposed to be Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. Although John, quite clearly, is a woman in this representation, perhaps Mary Magdalene. And obviously with the cup being called the Marian chalice, the chalice that was supposed to have been used by Mary Magdalene to collect Christ.
At the crucifixion, she holds the cup up to collect the blood of Christ.
Yeah.
So what led you to this?
A family called the Fitzwarren family possessed a cup which they claimed was the Holy Grail. Their descendants were called the Vernons, and their descendant was Thomas Wright, the man who had this stained glass window put in.
So, the plot thickens here.
He claims to have the very same cup, but he's got no son to hand it on to.
No story has generated so many conspiracy theories. But that's a testimony to the seductive power of the myth and its symbols.
And if one of those statues has to be the one that's important, it must be the one that's above St. John's head, the eagle statue.
The Shropshire Grail mystery leads to Hawkston Park. It's an 18th century fantasy garden, which has now become another Arthur country. Only this one was made to order. In this man-made grotto, the mischievous Victorian Thomas Wright left a final clue.
Right. So these are the two statues. This one here, Lion's statue, and the other one over here is the actual eagle statue. Let's see if we can move it. You can see its feet here. This is its breast, and its head would have been here. But it was in the base of this, when it was being moved down the cliff there, and it fell to the bottom, that from the base of it, there was a little hollow, and that's where the cup was found. The cup that was found in the statue, it's quite small. In fact, when you see it,
wow, can we bring it to life?
Yeah. When you actually see it, it doesn't look much different to an egg cup. But
God, how interesting.
It was taken to the British Museum, where they identified it, and this is interesting, as a 1st century Roman scent jar.
No.
And it can't be proved that that's exactly what it was, but that's certainly the style of it.
How like medieval people we still are. The power of the tale is so great that we will it to be true. But despite all the seekers, from the medievals to the Da Vinci Code, the Grail is pure myth. A symbol created by Chrétien and the poets who came after him, of something that can never be possessed, but for which we must still strive. A symbol, perhaps, of the human quest itself. And the Holy Grail is not the only symbol of Arthur.
which was created to meet our needs. In medieval England, they thought Arthur's Camelot was Winchester, and here they have Arthur's Round Table. It's the ultimate symbol of equality among men of power, copied in parliaments round the world, in the United Nations itself. It was made for Edward I in 1290, after he'd reburied Arthur's bones in a marble tomb in Glastonbury.
Well, this is the best way to view it. I've been so near it for years.
So it's a fake.
Yeah.
But of course, it's also real.
Wow. Now we're up here, you can start to make out the names of the heroes, can't you? Galahad, Lancelot the Black,
Gawain.
Oh, that's Gawain.
That's Gawain. And then Percival.
And this is Tristram.
Tristram de Lions. Gareth. Bedivere. And all the odd ones.
200 years later, the table was repainted by another would-be Arthur, Henry VIII.
This was painted when?
It was painted sometime just after August 1516.
Yeah.
Henry had come here, first visit as king, saw it was in bad condition, and immediately issued a writ from Southampton to repair the hall and to paint the table. This is one of the world's greatest symbols, after all, but it's changed its symbolic meaning through the centuries.
So what was Henry's interest in the Arthur story?
Henry wanted to be elected Holy Roman Emperor. So he has King Arthur painted with his own face, so that this is clearly a descendant of Arthur, who rules the Round Table in this night.
Arthur reborn.
Arthur reborn. Yeah. Redivivus.
And so, Geoffrey of Monmouth's prophecy had come true. Henry VIII was a Tudor. The Tudors were Welsh. The old monarchy of Britain had been restored. And the myth of Arthur had become a parable of Britain itself, a dream of what Britain had been and could be once more. Paradise land, whose golden age might still come again. But only a few years later, it was Henry himself who smashed that old world forever. When Henry fell out with the Pope and made England Protestant, he ordered the demolition of England's old medieval Catholic culture. And here in Glastonbury, Arthur's Isle of Avalon, they felt the full fury of the Reformation.
It's like the Taliban in Afghanistan, or the Cultural Revolution in China, and among the casualties, the bones that lay in the black marble tomb in the middle of the nave. Arthur and Guinevere, whoever they really belonged to, gone forever.
With that, you might have thought the myth of Arthur had run its course. The Tudor Revolution would lead us into the modern world. The age of angels and grails, gone forever. But like every nation, the British still needed their myths. Myths of identity, myths of state.
Visitors come and think this is medieval, but actually it's...
well, they come and they know that it represents British history, but
In the 19th century, the Houses of Parliament were rebuilt and decorated with the tales of Arthur and his knights.
This is our legend and myth, which Victorians thought was most appropriate.
Here in her robing room, when Queen Victoria dressed for great affairs of state, she did so under the gaze of her mythic predecessor.
What they wanted in this room was some kind of aesthetic which represented the merits and the virtues of kingship, of monarchy.
Through Arthur, England would engage again with her lost past. For his Arthurian epic, the Victorians' favourite poet, Alfred Tennyson, joined forces with the pioneer of photography, Julia Margaret Cameron. And the same tales that had held the medieval spellbound now caught the mood of the Victorian age. The once and future king had returned.
This is the original binding, is
it? Original binding, yeah. And the original signature by Mrs. Cameron.
Oh, wow, there's the man himself. Gosh, so these are all...
And this is an
original print. What's so striking about them is how much they correspond to what our image of what the Arthurian period looks like today. I mean,
well, because D.W. Griffith, the great American silent filmmaker, actually was hugely influenced by Mrs. Cameron. So therefore, you actually have her sense of lighting and dress and all that going straight into early Hollywood.
And there's a direct line from this through silent movies and onwards.
Yeah.
There's such wonderful images, isn't it? Let's look at this.
So there.
Oh God, look at this.
Yeah.
Lancelot and Guinevere. I mean, there's a very melancholy strain in all this, isn't it? This is the height of the Victorian Empire, isn't it? How would you explain this?
You have this undertow, as Arnold said, the sea of faith retreating. You've got Darwin developing the theory of evolution, not yet published at this point, but actually already in the air, so to speak, intellectually. This sense that these Victorian certainties were already ebbing away just as they were at the high point. I think it's a very conscious turning one's back on what's become the modern world.
Freedom fighter, Superman, Christian hero, and now head of the first British Empire. A tired giant whose noble ideals slipped through his fingers. But a figure who united the British in a mystical vision of their past. A fantasy, but somehow, like all the best myths, still true.
Smoking policy is now operated in all internal accommodation on this list.
So you see this great mass of legends and stories about King Arthur grew and was added to over hundreds of years, responding to the times, to needs that were political and cultural and even emotional, psychological. And you can see too that most of them have no origin in real historical events. They're the product of wonderful imagination of the storytellers. But is that all there is to it? Where did the first Arthur storytellers get their tales? How far back do they really go? Well, to find out in the islands of Britain today, there's only one place you can go. To Ireland. I went down into County Cork with Professor Dahi O'Hogan to find one of only two storytellers still alive who can recite the Gaelic hero tales of ancient Ireland.
Yeah, very nice to meet you. I'm Michael, yeah, very nice to meet you. This is
Michael Quillen, Michael Wood.
Patrick, the fiddle player, is 90 years old, and the tale teller himself, Sean, a sprightly 80.
The chóla agus miacha agus tá mecha gom den osing agus leis an sionoch ná'r hémanach. The gleig sé chuige a ghair agus svíadachas vágachas bad clósacha the own.
This story tells of Finn McCool, of the young warriors, the Fianna. A tale with uncanny echoes of Arthur, the magic sword, the cup that brings eternal life.
Hogan an ordol, fiachan a tiri chilnum la dorcas tri crapet of war na tol fail erste fiún.
How did you first hear these stories? What captured your imagination?
I learned it from the old people.
From the old people?
From the old people. Yeah. The mind of the important thing is the only thing we have in this world is our way of thinking. There is nothing stronger than our way of thinking.
When that particular story is written in about the 16th century, the writer was using older motifs and older Fianna materials. When you're listening to Sean, you're listening to a voice that goes back for centuries and centuries and centuries, and even for millennia. When you listen to Sean telling the Fianna story, you get something of the impression of what it was like in this period in Wales from the 9th to the 11th century, when the Arthurian tradition was oral before it became part of the great literature of Europe.
When I'm telling that story, those stories, I'm living in.
So through Sean, we can trace elements of the tale back 1,500 years or more. But are they just fantasy? Could there even have been a real author, as the Welsh believe?
It's only a short hop of about 15 miles at its shortest between County Antrim in Ireland and the islands of Scotland. This stretch of water has been a passageway for migrants and seamen and saints, along with stories and legends for thousands of years.
This is the Isle of Iona. It's the burial place of the kings of the Scots, Gaelic speakers who came here from Ireland in the Dark Ages.
Okay.
It was here that an Irish saint, Columba, came in the 6th century and converted the Scots to Christianity.
So this is a 19th century edition.
Yeah. He came from what we would now call Northern Ireland, and this area of Scotland was already colonised by his people, and they were having a hard time because the king of the Picts and the rest of Scotland was giving them a hard time, and they maybe sent for Columba as an important person from their own tribe to come and help them to counter this pressure from the Pictish king.
Columba's was a brutal age of battles between Scots, Picts and Saxons, but his life was written down in one of Britain's earliest biographies.
And this is the crucial bit here. This is the bit that I'm looking for. It's about the sons of King Aidan, who's really the first of the king of the Scots, who emerges from the shadows as a real person. And it's about a prophecy that Saint Columba makes. Nunc barbarian fugam vertuntur, edano quam libet in felix tamen concessa victoria est. King Aidan's troops win the battle, but it's an unhappy victory. 303 heroic warriors die in the battle. But even more important, in the same battle, Miatorum superius memorata in bello, trucidati sunt, were killed the two sons of Aidan, Echodius and the eldest son, Artorius. Arthur.
Just like the Holy Grail, we search for Arthur, willing him to be real. But there is a real Arthur, who died in a tragic battle in the 6th century, somewhere north of the Roman wall. Was it his name that was handed down by the bards to all those later storytellers?
And never was there seen a more doleful battle in any Christian land. And they fought all day long and never stinted till all the noble knights were laid to rest in the cold earth. And they fought till it was near night. And then King Arthur spied the traitor, Sir Mordred, and he ran towards him crying, "Traitor, now is your death day come." And King Arthur smote Sir Mordred under the shield with a thrust of his spear right through his body. And when Sir Mordred felt he had his death wound, he pushed himself with his last strength up to the burr of King Arthur's spear. And he smote his father, Arthur, with his sword over the side of his head. And then Sir Mordred fell stark dead to the earth, and the noble Arthur fell in a swoon. "Ah," he said, "now I have my death."
The Welsh chronicles say that Arthur's last battle was at a place called Camlan, a Roman fort on Hadrian's Wall called Camboglana.
That's so beautiful.
Lovely. Well, now you're climbing the wall, you see.
Oh, yes. So we're now inside the...
You've been now inside the fort.
In Major Johnston's potting shed were relics from the end of the Roman world.
This is amazing. Absolutely amazing.
The fort was occupied by a team of Tungrians, a balanced force of infantry.
The fort has never been excavated, but we know that it was still occupied in the 6th century, when the legend of Arthur may have begun. And even more extraordinary, the Welsh bard, Myrddin, the first Merlin, sang his heroic songs about this very area.
Yeah, look here. Another hero figure. This looks like some kind of altar here, doesn't it? With a hero or divine figure with some kind of club. Could be a war god. I don't know whether you know this story, but in the Annals of Wales, which are in a 10th century manuscript in the British Library, has a note speaking of a battle at a place called Camlan, which, if it is a Roman place name at all, must be Camboglana.
Yes, right.
In which Arthur and Medrode died.
That's very interesting. Yes. Well, I remember that from what one knows of Arthur, but I'd never sort of connected that it might be here.
Could it be here? So you've got the whole pantheon.
So here at last, perhaps, is a tangible link with an Arthur of history.
It doesn't have to be a historical prototype, but if there was, maybe this is the connection.
As he lay dying, Arthur said to Sir Bedivere, "Here, take Excalibur, go with it to the lake, and throw my sword in the water." But Sir Bedivere couldn't bring himself to throw such a wonderful thing away, and twice he hid Excalibur, and came back to the king, and said he had thrown it in the water. "What did you see?" said Arthur. "I saw nothing but the ripple of the waves," said Bedivere. "Ah, "Ah, traitor untrue," said King Arthur, "now you have twice betrayed me."
The third time, Bedivere threw the sword into the lake, and an arm appeared, grasped the sword, and took it back into the water. Safe for the day, the king will return.
And so, over the centuries, King Arthur became a symbol of their histories for the peoples of the islands of Britain. And in that sense, as with all great myths and legends, he's still alive today. As Sir Thomas Malory said more than 500 years ago, some men say that King Arthur is not dead, but had by the will of our Lord Jesus Christ into another place. And men say he will come again and win the Holy Cross. I will not say that this shall be so, but on his tomb is written this verse: "Here lies Arthur, once and future king."